So I'm going to show you how to sculpt this snaky looking creature and then texture it with a simple UV unwrap and apply the grease pencil feature. Grease pencil just allows you to draw onto the surface of your 3D object. Grease pencil is only available in Blender, so you wouldn't be able to take anything you make using the grease pencil like this into something like a game engine like Unity or Unreal. But it's a fun effect to have if you want to make something like an animation in just using Blender, the Blender render. So let's go up to File, New. We'll start with a cube. Don't save. Here's my cube. I'm going to put the cube into orthographic view by clicking down here on the grid. I find this makes it a bit easier to judge our 3D modeling. Next, what we're going to do is go up to object mode. I'm going to get into edit mode. You could push tab for edit mode. And then I'm going to go to face mode and select this face, push E on the keyboard, pull out my body off the snake, push E again, pull another part of the body out, and then I'll use the move tool. Let's move the neck of the snake up. I'll use the scale tool and the outer ring to uniform scale the snake's neck. Let's do another extrude, and if we look on the side, you'll see that's how a snake is looking. I might use the rotate tool. I'm going to rotate the green axis here and extrude again. Right, so we're making the shape. That's the snake's tail. Let's I might just make the tail a bit smaller using the scale tool. So again, the outer ring. I'm going to pull the outer ring inwards. So that's the rear of the snake. Now I'll go to the front of the snake. Make sure I'm in edit mode and face mode. Choose the front of the snake, push E to extrude, and I will tilt the currently selected face upward. So I'm going to go to rotate, tilt up, push E, pull out the neck. I will make it a little bit smaller. So come down again using the scale tool, push E to extrude out. And now we'll start building the head. To do that, I'm going to push E to extrude again, only a little bit. Then what I'll do is I will scale upward and I will rotate the face so we can get the head pointed forward. That's going to be the back of the skull of the snake, and I'll push E to extrude, and I will add the brow ridges of the snake by choosing this upward face, pushing E to extrude, and then I'll get the scale tool to bring this shape in a bit more. Select the front face, extrude this, scale the snout of the snake. Notice here I'm doing a non-uniform scale. That's because I've accidentally selected the blue axis of the scale tool. I'm going to undo that and then make sure I choose the outer ring, and that way I get a uniform scale in all three axes. Okay, So that's our general snaky snake. And next what we're going to do is we need to make this overall form look more organic. At the moment it looks very boxy. That's why they call this box modeling. So I'm going to go back up to edit mode and choose object mode. Then from object mode we go to the right hand panel and I'm going to choose the modifier properties, this little monkey wrench looking thing. Modifiers are your filters if you've used Snap or Instagram, and we're going to apply a filter or the modifier. Going to click add modifier, choose generate and subdivide surface. The subdivision surface takes every four-sided shape and divides the four-sided shape up into four more tinier shapes, and that gives the effect of rounding or averaging the shape to make it more round or smoother. And there's my current snake. If you like, you can increase the amount of subdivisions, which will increase the smoothness. So over here in the levels viewport, I'm going to increase that to 2. And now that I've done that, this is just a preview, so I need to apply, and that will convert the preview into actual polygons, which we could manipulate. So there's apply. So now we have this shape, and if we go to wireframe mode, you can see that we have the extra geometry. We started off with a few extruded faces of the cube, and now by using the subdivide modifier, it's actually put in extra geometry there, which means that it's just higher resolution, more detail. Okay, I'm going to go out of wireframe mode now, and I'm going to choose what we call material preview. That's next to our solid view. So wireframe, solid and material. The material view allows us to add textures and materials. At the moment there is no texture, it's just the default shading that you get. So in order to apply a material, we need to do a special thing called UV editing. And if you have a look where my mouse is, there is a red, green and blue compass. These are our X, Y and Z axes. This is because Blender is a 3D modeling tool. But in order for this software to understand how to apply 2D, two-dimensional paint to the 3D object, we need to do a thing called a UV unwrap. Currently we can see 3 axes, X, Y and Z, but we need to transform from X, Y and Z from 3 dimensions into 2 dimensions. In maths you might have heard of a net, and nets allow us to go from the 3D volume to the 2D surface area, and that's effectively what we're going to do right now. So we're going to go up to the UV editing window, the menu up here, and that when I click on that it will split my Blender window up into the 3D mode over here. So there's the 3D, and then over on the left hand side is my 2D viewport of the 3D shape. So we're moving from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions. It's called UV so that we don't confuse it with X and Y, because X and Y is already being used, and if we wouldn't want to have X1, Y1 and X2, Y2, it's just too confusing, so we call it UV instead. And what we're going to do is, inside our 3D view, we're going to make sure we're in edit mode and in face mode, and we're going to select all the faces. You can do this by pushing A on the keyboard. If you just use the mouse like I did, it will only select the faces that are visible. So if I turn this around, it's missing those faces on the other side. So if you push A on the keyboard, it selects all the faces. So if you have a look at the UV window now, you'll see that the UV window is showing our snake as this crucifix. And that's not because the snake is some reincarnation of our Lord the Savior, because that would be quite funny being a snake. It's because we started this shape off as a cube, and so Blender is interpreting the shape as a cube, and this is not good for more advanced shapes that we might want to create using Blender. So what we want to do is a thing called UV unwrapping. There's lots of different ways to do this. The easiest way and the fastest way just to get this job done is to go to our 3D viewport, and we're going to go to the UV menu up here, and I'm going to choose Smart UV Project. And what this does is it will use its algorithms to interpret what it thinks are the right ways to cut apart and build a net from our shape. So if I click on this, we can leave the defaults for now. And in our UV window, you'll see that we have a side view and a top view and a bottom view, and two front and rear views. They are represented by these islands that you can see in the UV window. Now, there is a manual way to do this, and I'll explain it in another video. Just for the moment, you went to use UV Smart UV Project, but there are all these other techniques for separating and cutting up our 3D volume into the 2D surfaces that you can see in the UV window. Now that we've done that, we can push the UV window aside. We don't need that anymore. We would use the UV window if we needed to edit each of those islands if you weren't happy with what the smart projection did, but that looks fine to me. So now that we've done this, I'm going to we're going to put our snake into the texture painting mode. So I'm going to go back up to where our edit mode was, and I'm going to choose Sculpt mode. Really quickly, Sculpt mode allows you to use the brushes that you see down below, and they allow us to paint extra details onto our objects. So I like to think of it as digital clay. If you'd like to paint something symmetrical, say paint some bulgy googly eyes for the snake, we want to paint symmetry in the y-axis. If you look where my mouse is hovering up here, the y will go from the lateral sides of this snake. So I'm going to go up to where the butterfly is. The butterfly represents symmetry. Choose Y, and then I will make my strength of my brush a little bit bigger, and I'm going to paint just by tapping on the snake here on its head. You can see if we had more subdivision surfaces, you could get a more detailed sculpt, but this is quite a low poly snake. So that's how you use the sculpt mode. Next, we're going to go up to texture mode. So we go down to where it says texture paint, and you should see your snake go all purple. Purple means there's an error here. There's no texture on our shape. So the first thing we need to do is go allocate a material and texture. So I'm going to go up to where it says texture slots, and then I'm going to choose the plus button here to add a base color. Now there are lots of different types of texture maps. If you play video games, you might have heard of them. A normal map, for instance, normal maps allow you to sneak extra details, things like the edges of pores or scales or tiles, things like scars and cracks in surfaces. That's what you'd use a normal map for. But we're going to just apply a base color. If you're using an older version of Blender, you'll probably have to find this in the material tab down here where my mouse is. But if you're on Blender 4.5 Plus, it will be up where my mouse is. Okay, now we can choose the different drawing options, the different brushes, and you can start to paint. And it should just work like it does in any other painting software. You're able to choose colors and intensities. So I'm going to paint my snake. Let's paint it purple and then give it some yellow polka dots maybe. So I'm going to go up to the brush, choose a white, which will give us access to the rest of the hues, and then this will allow me to paint. As you're painting, you should be curious about what's happening to the UV window. Remember, this is the 3D view, but there's also our 2D view over here. And so as you're painting in 3D, you should see the 2D version being updated, and vice versa. You can actually paint on the 2D surface and see it working in 3D. I still have my symmetry turned on, and we'll need to turn that off in a minute when we do the polka dots. I'm going to choose a white color for the snake's eyeballs, and this is why we still want symmetry on. Okay, so there's the eyeballs, and the symmetry has painted on both of those sides. Next, what we're going to do is give it some yellow polka dots. So I'm going to go turn our symmetry off by clicking on the Y up here, and now I'm going to make my brush size smaller and choose a yellow with a bit of an orange tinge, so that is a complementary color to the purple. And now I can place some asymmetric dots. Notice there's a bit of a white streak on the back of the head. That's because the UV Smart project has not understood where the parts of the snake are, and this is why eventually you'd want to learn how to manually do your own UV unwrapping. Okay, so there's my polka dots, and now we can add the grease pencil that I showed you at the start of the lesson. So what we're going to do now is we need to get out of this mode. So I'm going to go back to object mode. So we're in texture paint mode. I'm going to click on object mode, and you should see that we've now lost the paint, and that's because remember we had the wireframe view. Well, we can also switch to solid view, which is without any materials or textures, and the next one along is actually our materials, and the next one along after that is your rendered view, and that will give you all the bells and whistles to make it look more like a Pixar animation. But I'm just going to keep mine on the material shader for the moment. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to add, and we're going to add the grease pencil. So grease pencil allows you to draw outlines over the top of your shapes, your objects. So we're going to add a blank grease pencil object. And now that I've done that, I can go to draw mode. So just make sure in your scene collection, in the hierarchy here, you have the grease pencil selected, G pencil, and then you're going to go to its drawing mode. And then now you can choose an outline color. So I'm going to go with an obvious black outline. So I've got to choose my brush first down the bottom. And then I can choose a hue. And also, when I go to paint, there's our stroke color. When I go to paint, you need to make sure, if you'd like to paint onto your object, you need to select surface. And the offset is how far away from the top of the surface you'd like to draw. If you don't have it selected, then it's just going to put grease pencil in the 3D space and it won't apply to your actual object. So yeah, make sure you've got surface on. And then now you can start to paint with the grease pencil. So here's, I promise, googly eyes. So there's some eyes over here. And it might look good to outline my snake, so I'm going to increase the radius and draw an outline. And there's a whole style of cell shading that grease pencil here is trying to emulate, and you see it in a lot of animated media. See what's happening here? It's when I went to draw on the snake, it wasn't able to interpret that I wanted to get the head. So with the grease pencil, you do need to keep moving around to make sure that you don't get these errors. So I'll have to erase these and come back and attempt to draw at a different angle, and that will hopefully get the effect that I'm after. So after that cell shading, if you've ever played Borderlands, that's the style you can emulate. Okay, so that's my tutorial and showing the basics of a number of different painting styles inside Blender. Hope you got something out of that.